Thank you so much, by the way. We really appreciate you coming. So I usually like to start these by talking about the beginning. Like, tell us how you got started in your career. And I actually saw that you worked for Senator in the beginning. So you've done a lot of different things, and I kind of want to get the beginning of how you got to where you are.
I have the classic background for an entrepreneur, which is that I have no background whatsoever in anything that I'm doing. So I've had multiple careers, and a lot of us starts back familiarly. I'm actually a multi-generational entrepreneur. My grandparents actually were born in the U.S., I'm probably third generation, but my grandfather and great uncle had a laundry route, literally a horse and cart on the Lower East Side, and then they founded a company called Brooklyn Better Bleach. And my great uncle founded a construction company, one of the bigger real estate companies in New York. So that's 2 generations back, and then my father went into family business, and he's an entrepreneur. I'd like to say that during the dot-com boom, I was a finalist for the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year Award in New York about 8 or 9 years ago. So my father won it 4 years ago. Now, I thought that's a little tacky. You're like, late 70s and you're winning New York City Entrepreneur of the Year Award.
What did he win it for?
Get out of the way, real estate. It's a family purpose.
Is that Brothers and Sisters?
Yes. So I come from an entrepreneurial real estate family. So my very first entrepreneurial effort, the company I started when I was about 10 years old, was Rose Productions, which was a multimedia organization. I have my business cards from the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, a multimedia organization. Before multimedia had a very different connotation around here. And my younger brother was a magician. He would do magic shows and parties for school kids and so on. And I figured that he needed appropriate marketing material, marketing communication stuff like headshots and playbills and posters and so on. And so I produced all of his marketing collateral. After about 2 years, he realized that the sum total of his income was about the sum total of my income, and there was a slight problem with this pass-through of his revenues to his supplier. So I lost my first client at that point. But I actually at that point had some background, and then when I was off in college, in high school, I realized that although I enjoyed science, I wasn't a very overly diligent science student, but I could often get another half grade on my reports by having a very nice-looking report cover. So I started doing graphic design for my report covers, and then I got to college and realized that the college I was at had a letterpress print shop. So I started working on letterpress, and then eventually took over the letterpress print shop and turned it into, I had 75 apprentices that we taught, and we did all kinds of interesting business. And then at school, when I was in college, that was back in the day, we still had fireplaces, real fireplaces in rooms, and so I figured that you needed wood for these fireplaces. So I would buy wood wholesale by the cord and then sell it retail to my dorm mates and stuff. And so I was very entrepreneurial. So I actually got profiled in a college magazine back in the 1970s as an entrepreneur, whatever that kind of strange thing is. Because now we all take for granted this entrepreneurial stuff, but it was a relatively unusual thing from way back then. And then I went to college that had a thing called bladder ball. And you've probably ever heard of bladder ball. In New Haven, there was this tradition where once a year they would bring out this giant canvas, an inflatable ball, back then, 8 feet in diameter, drop it in the middle of the old campus, and then each of the residential colleges would try and get it back to their own college. And the problem was this was lubricated with a lot of spirits, as it were. People started drinking screwdrivers and Bloody Marys at 7 o'clock in the morning. So by the time this thing was released at like 11 o'clock, everybody was totally sloshed, and you ended up having something like 3,000 people running around New Haven trying to hit this giant ball back to their thing. So I figured that wasn't a very effective way to get out there and get in the middle of this melee. So what do you do? Well, entrepreneurial tactic formed a company. I formed the ball, the Pearson Bladder Ball Attack and Lifting League. And I sold shares in this company to my classmates, raising up money to hire a helicopter. And I was running the press, the Pearson Press, so I figured we needed propaganda literature, so we printed up all these propaganda pieces saying, Pearson has won bladder ball. Nobody's ever won bladder ball. Because of course it's developed this zoo. So we printed up several thousand of these things, and then I actually convinced the master of the college to come up with this helicopter, and so we actually flew over to New Haven in a helicopter, dropping these leaflets on the entire
I'm so glad we're recording this. That was great.
Well, but then of course, perception is all, right? And so that's why we're all big on marketing and personal branding and so on and so forth. So since nobody ever really won Blatterville, how do you get somebody to actually win Blatterville? Well, it's only really happens if it's recorded in public, right? So what I did was, this was back in the day before there were video cameras, so I had a film camera, so I took a film camera up in a helicopter and actually filmed the aerial shots of the entire Blatterville thing, and as soon as the helicopter landed, I raced over to Channel 8 television in New Haven and gave them the footage as a stringer, along with, of course, the entire script of the story, saying for the first time the college actually won Blatterville, and they aired the news story with the aerial footage and the official, so we actually won. But anyway, so I was doing that early in college.
Let me ask you a question just based on that story. I know, I was having a conversation with someone recently who kind of thinks that being an entrepreneur is in your DNA. And so do you think it's something you learn, or do you think it's something you are? Just based on some of these stories that
this is one of the great sort of chicken and egg questions, or nature versus nurture relative to anything in how people's characters or interests are formed. I think there is no question that there is some entrepreneurial something, whether it's genetic, whether it's psychological, whether it's psychiatric. There's a wonderful book, if you haven't read it, it's called The Hypomanic Edge, How a Little Bit of Craziness Equates to a Lot of Success. It's by a guy named John Gardner, who is a professor at Hopkins. And he was doing his graduate thesis on the interface of religion and psychiatry. So Joan of Arc, did she hear God, or was she just schizophrenic? That kind of thing. He was looking for various groups of people who seemed to share certain psychiatric similarities. And that was when, during the dot-com boom, he saw a newspaper cover with Bill Gross on the cover, and his headline said, "This man just lost $8 billion, why is he smiling?" So he figured that really the entrepreneurs were a little unusual, so he went to the psychiatric diagnostic manual to try and figure out, was there anything that might account for this kind of reaction? And he came up with a potential diagnosis, and he sent around a little sample survey to some of the biggest entrepreneurs he knew, Craig Venter, Steve Jobs, and a few others, and he listed 17 characteristics and said, just out of curiosity, do any of these ring a bell with you? Do any of these seem appropriate? And there were things like, talks very fast, full of ideas, passionate, doesn't sleep a lot, charismatic, takes too much risk, sexually promiscuous, and spends too much money, thinks they're going to conquer the world, doesn't suffer fools gladly, things like that.
So these are just what you look for?
And he got that, he was expecting, responses when you do psychiatric stuff, if you come in like one standard deviation, beyond that it gets to be interesting. The responses he got back on a scale of 1 to 5 were like, 5, 7, yes, this is me, 100% of these things. And so he said, well, maybe he has something there. And he looked at that in the manual, and the condition of which these were all the symptoms is something called hypomania. And hypomania, if you're all familiar with bipolar disorder or manic depression, mania is the manic part of bipolar, it's the top end. And hypomania means less than manic. Hypo is less than. And so, you know what the diagnostic differentiation is between mania, which is a psychiatric disorder where you get locked up and you have real problems, and hypomania? It turns out that they have exactly the same diagnosis, except hypomanics are functional. So, this whole book you wrote goes through analyzing all of these entrepreneurs, and it turns out that a very large percentage of them are hypomanic. So if you take, Gardner's approach that this is a psychiatric issue, he estimates that roughly 10%, up to 10% of the world is hypomanic. And that's probably, in people's experience, seems to be somewhere between 1% and 10% of the world are naturally entrepreneurial. Now, there are certainly entrepreneurs by circumstance. If you have to feed your family, the only way you can do it is to buy a widget for 2 and sell it for 3. You'll do that. But people who get off on it, like many of the people in this room, that's, I think, a relatively small, whether it's genetic or psychiatric, it's a small number. That being said, When I teach entrepreneurship, I run the Finance and Entrepreneurship and Economics program at Singularity University out in Silicon Valley, which is a fascinating operation. And in a lecture on entrepreneurship there, what I like to say is that the purpose of entrepreneurship programs is to move people along the spectrum, because there is a whole spectrum from people who are crazy, Larry, Ellison, Richard Branson, lunatic Mark Cuban, nutty entrepreneurs on one hand, and there are people who I'm sure we all know who would never in a gazillion billion years consider working for themselves, creating, starting a company. For them, it's like pulling their fingernails out by the roots, right? And so on that spectrum, what entrepreneurship programs can do, and entrepreneurship books and videos and blogs and centers like General Assembly can do, is to help move people along the spectrum. So that if you're totally paranoid about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs and you don't even want to touch them to get cooties in it, this understanding how they work, why they work, what the startup process is, can help you maybe work for a startup, or at least not spit on the next entrepreneur, right? And if you're somebody who's sort of in the middle, and you're not quite sure, it can help you to the next level and say, well, maybe I could start a company, or maybe I'll go work in the early stage. And if you're somebody who's at the far end as a natural entrepreneur, it can give you the tools to be really spectacular.
Let's just survey the room for a second. How many people are founders in this room? Wow. How many people are looking for money? And how many people are looking for a job? Okay, and how many people are hiring? Okay, so take notes.
But that's a fascinating start. Those who can't see this, there were about 3 times as many people hiring as there were people looking for a job, which is absolutely fascinating. And what this is showing is there is no shortage of jobs out here, certainly in the startup world. The majority of all jobs in the US are coming from early stage startup kind of companies. The problem is matching the right kind of person to the right kind of job. And that's a whole critical thing about what you do. I'm actually doing the closing presentation at TEDx Wall Street next week. And the theme there is redefining success. And we'll be talking about how the success in this new world means you take charge of your own career. This is very much the sort of view that Reid Hoffman's new book, where your career is what you make it. And so whether it's a question of being engaged in the social conversation or improving your skills with classes here at General Assembly, once you get to be that kind of fit, there are lots of jobs that are available.
So I'm just going to use that as an opportunity to talk about the Jobs Act. We talked about it briefly before, and your opinions on crowdfunding and how they play a role in the economy at the moment.
So this is going to sound a little schizophrenic, but there are really 2 sides to this story. On the one hand, obviously, I believe in the democratization of capital. And we're looking at a world where companies are shrinking and shrinking. The day of the big company is gone. If you take a look at the size of companies that were in the mid-20th century, they were enormous. You take a look at companies now, the biggest, most successful companies in the world, the Apples and the Googles and so on, they are shadows of what their predecessors were in this space. And that trend is only going to continue. So companies, another one of my talks at Singularity U is called "No More Companies, No More Jobs on the Way to a World Without Work," because companies literally are disappearing. Whoa, so what does that mean? It means that you're going to have to end up being an entrepreneur. And it means that as technology makes it possible to start with less and less and less. The average company starting here at General Assembly is using a fraction, a minuscule fraction of the amount of capital that it would take to launch that same company 20 years ago. When I started my first we got derailed along the way. I was talking about my career. I mean, so I've had multiple careers, and so getting out of school, I actually started in politics, and my major was in urban planning, and my minor was in the art of the book, the history of printing. And so, being an urban planner, my first job out of college was working for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan as his urban affairs expert, and I ended up running his regional office here in New York. And then from there, I ended up going to real estate, the family firm, and spent a decade in real estate development. And then on the side, I started a company, like many people here have started companies. And so my first company, which was started out as a software company in New York City before there was anything called the internet, eventually turned into an internet company, and that company ended up getting venture capital. It's a whole other.
So that was your first time.
No, it was actually it was about company number 6 along the way somewhere. Back then, so after real estate, after Moynihan, I went back into business school to Columbia, got an MBA in real estate finance. Then I started a business with my professor from Columbia. We actually started one of the world's first computer training companies called the Computer Classroom. This is back in 1983, before you guys were born. And so we did training in VisiCalc and Lotus 1, 2, 3, and word processing. And so that company is actually still going on now, although I went years ago, and it's now technically a training operation. So that was one of my first after business school company. And then I got to tell you how I got this started with this other entrepreneurial stuff. So I had been online since 1979, way back. So like I had an Apple II computer before there was Apple II Plus, right? So the very first thing coming out of the camp. And I was a non-hacker hacker, right? I'm not really a techie, but I'm a technologist, so I understand this stuff, but I'm a real shitty coder. So I got an Apple II, and I was playing, dabbling, and I got online. Now you ask, how the hell can you get online in like early 1980s? Because there was no online. Well, there were these things called bulletin board systems. And a bulletin board system was actually, you would set up your computer with a modem, and then you put up a phone number, and other people with their computer would call your computer on a one-to-one basis. And it was like a store and forward, like a pop service. They would leave a message, and then they would hang up, and somebody else would call in and get the message, and you could get bulletin boards going with that. So I had a bulletin board, and then eventually the guys who had the big time-sharing computers, which were big computers, big back then, now it's not an iPhone, that were running these major corporations, realized that their business was mostly during the day, and they had these computers sitting idle in the middle of the night. And so there was, one company that had a lot of these computers, and a very bright guy said, there are all these little people with these dial-up modems and these little strange things called personal computers, and if we actually give those people access to dial into our big computer and use the power and disk storage of our big computer, there might be another revenue stream for them there. And so that's how the first sites like The Source and CompuServe began to happen. So I was on CompuServe shortly after, back when Forbes called CompuServe, it was called IKNet. And so I got online there, and I participated in the Apple computer forums there. And it so happened that over time, all the people who were these early adopters in these forums they were the real hackers. They were starting these companies. So then fast forward a little bit, 1984, the Mac is released, really cool. I became an system operator of the Macintosh forums on CompuServe. Got to know a lot of people and kind of a little gregarious. I became not the system op, the sushi op of the micro network, that whole user group on CompuServe. And every year at the Mac World Trade Show, we'd run these big sushi banquets and stuff. But along the way, so I got to the first year there was a Mac World show. I went there, and it turned out that all these people who I had known online had these really cool companies, these little like 10-foot booths, and that was really interesting. But the really cool thing was they got to go to special parties that I didn't get to go to, because this is not like South by where there were fortunately parties. Back then there were parties for the people who attended these shows, but there were these sort of invitation-only parties for the exhibitors. And my friends were the exhibitors, I didn't get to go. So I said, problem, okay, what's the entrepreneurial solution? Well, clearly, you got to be an exhibitor. So for the next Mac World Trade Show, it was in 1988, I got a booth from Mitchell Associates. I was running...
just so you could go to the party.
Just so I got a party. So now I got a booth as an exhibitor. What am I exhibiting? Oh, okay. Great, okay, I got to backfill my booth. I got to come up with a product at that point. So I was looking around at these remainder catalogs. There used to be, this is again now everything in overstock online is sold out within 30 seconds of being obsolete. But back then there was enough of a lag time in technology development, so there were these catalogs of all these outmoded old electronic stuff. I saw in one of these catalogs a digital wristwatch that actually had a serial port on it and had 2K of RAM and a 2-line display screen on the watch itself. And Seiko had developed this thing in the mid-1980s, and Seiko Advertising, which I still have some of that in my files, showed a couple in bed with a wire connecting their two watches. You could exchange data with your significant other. This is like 1986, 1987. Talk about a benighted, ridiculous thing. So, and this thing sold for, $200, $300, $400, whatever it was. Suffice to say, they didn't sell any of these at all. So they had junked these things, and they were sending them back to Japan with bulldozers. So something ended up as a major catalog. And the catalog I saw, had like 9 units in it. So I finally got those 9 units, and I figured, well, it's got a serial port, so how about we connect it to a Mac and call it the Wrist Mac? So also I created the Wrist Mac, which was a digital watch that connected to your Mac. And again, under the heading of pickup teams, because I knew, my friend Nicholas Negroponte said that when the internet started, he knew every single person on the internet because it started at Harvard and Berkeley or so on. I wouldn't say I knew every person, but I knew a lot of people in this space. And so I pulled together the guy who created the HP 12C desktop calculator, Richard Reich, who was my coder, and a guy named Neil Shapiro, who was a founding editor of Mac User magazine, wrote the manual, and a guy named Dennis Brothers, who wrote the H2X protocol for Mac transfer, designed the cable to go to the Mac. So we had this sort of pickup little team, and we created this product called the Wrist Mac, and now you can actually download it from your Mac into your watch. And I took it, so now I can take it to the Mac World Show, and I had a product called the Wrist Mac in this booth. And we started showing people, and to my surprise, not to my surprise, people really thought this was very cool. Somebody in Apple was overheard the press room saying, no, the best thing to show us is that watch, but what a cheesy salesman. Licensing, and so forth. And so actually, I happen to be wearing it. Yes, so it's now 20, whatever it is, years later, 23 years later. And this is an original Wrist Mac over there. So now I had it, so all of a sudden, so like here we are at Mac World, Fred Smith from FedEx, comes over and buys one. Bill Atkinson, who wrote Mac Paint, comes and buys one. So the next thing you know, I actually had a bona fide hit in this product. I'm not sure the real estate business and doing everything else, and so I thought that was pretty cool. And so I went back to order more of these watches. Of course, they were made, so I had to go to Seiko and get all the ones back from Japan. On a boat, we did the cables, and it got to be a whole big thing. Anyway, so this actually leads up to the answer over here. So here I was with this product, and having gone through all of the Wrist Macs, or the Seiko watches, we had silver versions being built. Actually, I then got a call from NASA along the way, and NASA says, we're flying a Mac Portal way back in the early days on the space shuttle. But the problem we have in the shuttle is that the astronauts really can't hear the annunciators because of the ambient noise in the spacecraft. You think maybe that this watch of yours could absolutely say no more.
You sold the watches to NASA.
So we created the space shuttle watch. Yes, the Wrist Mac. The
things we don't know.
The silver version of the Wrist Mac. We did a little version for them, and so they actually would upload the schedules for the astronauts from mission control to the Mac on board the space shuttle and download it into their watches. So now, of course, this was the space shuttle watch. So now at the next Mac trade show, we had, it's very politically correct now, but back then there were booth babes. So our booth babes back then were...
Don't worry about me. There's other people that might be very upset about
they dressed in NASA jumpsuits, and we gave out free fried astronaut ice cream, and it was a very big cool thing.
As women should do.
Obviously today. So here we were. The only problem, pretty quickly, was this was selling out really fast, and I was a limited number of these things. So I go back to Seiko and say, okay, well, we're actually selling these things. We got distribution in all the catalogs and stuff. So it's still my hobby in my spare time. But we had to do a new one. Can you do one with like more RAM and give you a screen and whatever? And they said, sure, we're happy to design it for you. Two costs about $3 million. I said, okay, that's not going to work. So that would seem to be the end of the Wrist Mac product. And so, but anyway, so here we are selling this thing, and I had to come up with a name for the company. So and it came as a bit of a surprise. So I only had a very short period of time. And back then I was thinking of things like, as you would imagine, easy to spell, easy to pronounce, like Lion software, whatever. And all the trademark were taken. This is even before URLs. So I finally decided as a hoot to incorporate it as X-Machina, X space M-A-C-H-I-N-A, which is a sort of multilingual pun in several areas. They use X-Machina, the implied they use me, X-Machina out of the Mac, out of the machine, formerly Mac, all kinds of really cool things. And so I thought that was a pretty cool name. And our business cards actually showed Michelangelo's hand with the very cool. The only problem was, you ever try and give somebody a card that says X space M-A-C-H-I-N? X Machina. So where did that name come? What does that mean? So I actually had to...
You didn't read a lot of...
well, on the back of the car, I actually had to put a paragraph explaining where the name came from. That was not one of my greatest ideas. But in any event, so here we were with this interesting product, and I couldn't do any more for Seiko, with Seiko. But there was clearly something to be had in here. And that's when Motorola introduced the wristwatch pager, the first of the really portable wristwatch pagers. And so we said, okay, cool. We'll figure out how to get into paging companies using like a dispatch protocol that operator dispatch centers use. And we can send it to, we'll private label the Motorola wristwatch pager, and it'll be the wireless wristband. And so we figured out how to do that. And then we realized the Motorola wristwatch pager really sucked. It was like the size of a saucer plate, and nobody in their right mind would be caught dead wearing this thing. Besides, it was actually a numeric pager, which didn't, getting numbers wouldn't really help you. But then Motorola introduced the first text pager. This is the predecessor of text messaging, stuff you messaging in smartphones. Back then it was a text pager. And we said, okay, so how about if we use this software to send a message to a text pager? And we did that, and we figured out how to do it, and we created a software server product. So I said, well, we're doing this, APIs. We had kinds of APIs back in 1991 or thereabouts. We'll let other programs send messages to your pager, because that was just when the very first inter-application communications programs, Windows 3.1 and System 7 on the Mac, stuff like dynamic data exchange, Apple events. So we created a server application that would let other programs send our program message saying, send this to a pager over there, a wireless device, and so now any program can be wireless. That sounded pretty cool. So our product is called Notify, still under the name Ex Machina, and we put this out, we took a couple of ads out, it seemed to do pretty well. People seem to like being able to type a message in their computer to a pager. So then I made a mistake. Then I said, okay, well, we have this toolkit with this API. Nobody ever heard of an API back then. We haven't done that back then. But we go like Dr. Gobb's journal and these heavy-duty coder mags and say, here's this thing, 3 lines of code will make your application wireless, and you can send it to your alarm clock, your compiler and stuff. So we put it out there, and we what, like a 30,000 person mailing list, and typically you get a couple of percent of this thing. We ended up getting 4,000 responses. People who wanted this was me and my real estate secretary in the so no way I could open 4,000 envelopes over there. So that was a bit of an overreach. However, at this point we now are in the paging software business, and the next thing I know, I get a call from, well, actually I'm a joiner, right? So I join everything. And there was a Paging Trade Association for paging companies. So I said, all right, well, I'll get my paging company, but we're a pager associate, so I joined the, what was then called Telocator, which was the Paging Industry Trade Association down in DC. And I joined, and the next thing I get a call from them saying, oh, well, you're a technical person, so we put you on the Paging Technical Committee. So I said, okay, that's fine. So I go down to my first meeting of the Paging Technical Committee, the Telocator Software Association, Paging Trade Association, and I find myself walking into a fight between Motorola and a company called Glen Air. Now, Motorola owned the entire pager market. They had like an 80–90% share of all pagers, and Glen Air owned the paging system market. The paging carriers had to send the messages, paging terminals send the messages out of these things. And the question was, well, okay, they want to do a new data page that will let you send data over these paging networks, wireless networks. And Motorola and Glen Air couldn't agree on what the spec should look like. And so the rest of the people on this committee turned out to be wireless, RF paging antenna people who didn't know the computer, hit them in the nose. And so the question was, what do you do? Well, I read this out ahead of the committee meeting, so I actually had an opinion. So I said, well, I think. And they said, well, okay, you're so smart, you write the protocol. So that's how I ended up as the editor of the paging industry's data protocols for wireless data messaging, a committee consisting of Motorola, Glen Air, and me as the editor and moderator of this thing, which was a very interesting situation. So, of course, being a quick study, I then had to quickly read up on how the hell to write ASM1 protocol and so on, which was very, very interesting, and we got into stuff. So I basically spent the next year and a half, pro bono, trying to figure out how to write the protocols, which was fascinating. Anyway, along the way then, I got to stop me anytime you want me to
Well,
stop.
just for your interest of time, because I think, we could really, I know you have a million stories. I want to fast forward to New York Angels and how you got started with.
Okay, so I got to jump like 6 companies and all kinds of fascinating anecdotes along the way. Suffice to say,
I would love to have, we can come back another time and we can get into all of
no, we're happy to. But all right, so make a long story short, I got to take a quick story and then I'll come back to that.
The floor is yours.
And so here I was with this paging software company, and this was really cool. This was like the first mobile industry, mobile software, mobile phone, no smartphones. Think back to the caveman, think Fred Flintstone, right? I mean, there was nothing. So we were the passport, the entire, it was really very cool. Because as far as, so here we were with the software application, the whole fancy schmancy API and so on, that let applications back in Windows apps send messages to mobile devices. The only mobile device was a pager back then. And so as far as the computer industry was concerned, mobile, oh wow, I think I'm carrying everything there. So we got credit from the computer industry for being the owners of the entire access to the mobile world. And the mobile world, which had all these guys who did pages and radio stuff, didn't know from computers at all. So we got credit for them for being the entry to the entire computer world. So here we were, this little teeny 5-person company sitting here in the middle of these 2 behemoth industries, which was really fascinating. The next thing I know, I get a call from a guy named David Corsi, who back then was the editor of a industry newsletter, saying they were starting a new event called Demo, which would be an introduction demonstration event for new technology. And they were picking the best software products of the year, and they had found us on this Notify product, and we were the best product software, one of the 75 best products of the year. Would we like to come out and demonstrate? So I said, sounds good to me. Where? California? Where's California anyway? So, being a New Yorker. So I go out to California to the demo, and back then, for those of you who've been to demos now, sort of a very organized thing with stands and stuff. Back then, they gave you like a desk and a chair and a guest chair and a potted plant, and you would sort of sit there and demo your stuff to people who would come around. So I'm sitting there demoing our paging, wired messaging thing, and people like John Doerr and Esther Dyson come around, they ask, very, very interesting, and a very cool thing, so how much are you looking for? How much what am I looking for? Well, they looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, how much money are you looking for? I said, I'll get back to you on that.
Like that problem.
I didn't know, but I didn't know there was anybody who would anyway, so suffice to say, through a very, very long story, we ended up falling backwards into venture capital and raising venture capital without even asking for venture capital, which like never, ever, ever, ever happens. And I didn't know venture capital existed before I even get it. So we actually got funded at that point by Warburg Pincus, the world's largest venture capital fund, who said that their goal was to see if they could turn a phenomenon into a company. So I said, okay, we'll give it a shot. So they invested in us, and so we're off to the races. And then so all of a sudden we started growing, and we became the largest developer of wireless messaging software. And, clients like Nextel and Skytel, all these big guys. But we're being farsighted, entrepreneurial, visionary type thing. There's this thing called the internet. Bum, 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 bum. You see this little shark thing coming, right? And so we were in the dial-up software business. You could use our thing and dial in and send a message, which wasn't going to work. So clearly, the whole dial-up world would disappear. So what do you do if you're a software company specialized in the wireless space? So we said, okay, is there a way that we can actually use this internet thingy that's coming out and this wireless thingy that we already got and knock it all together and do a wireless internet kind of thing? And so the answer was, yeah, there was. And we actually, Motorola at that point designed a chipset that would let you do wireless, a chip instead of a pager. So we actually created the first wireless data receiver for computers. It's called the news capture. We plug it into your computer via serial port, and we could broadcast that stuff wirelessly over paging frequencies and have it come into your computer. And we showed people under NDA what we were doing, and people started loving this, and it was really, really very, very cool. And so we all of a sudden, venture capital money started pouring into this thing, and we ended up having all kinds of people coming in. We employed a village, and then the next thing we got Symantec ended up with a piece of us, and this thing launched, and it was an enormously big critical success. Walt Mossberg did a whole full-page column in the journal about this, and we won the Cody Award. We actually came second for the Cody Best Software Product in a Year to Internet Explorer. Microsoft actually changed IE4 so we could beat it, watch stuff wirelessly in there. We licensed this to folks like Compaq and NEC and Village and Philips and all kinds of cool play. HP did a version of it with their sort of drop design kind of thing. And it shipped, and there was only one slight problem. Nobody bought it, which was very impressive. I mean, here was this clearly certifiable, genius product, wonderful system. I mean, we had a whole network operations center with 24/7 people. We were taking data and news feeds from everybody in the world and broadcasting out to your computer with a award-winning interface. And sometimes stuff just doesn't work.
So what would you give advice? What advice would you give to your former self, knowing what you know now?
Well, so what did I take out of that? Well, here we were betting on paging as a delivery mechanism. We designed our own hardware for this device, which was problematic. We were actually creating an entirely new category called wireless data receiver. What the hell that is, nobody knew. And then on top of that, we were building a brand called the Air Media Live Internet Broadcast Network. And so doing all those things simultaneously, it did not work. We ended up going through probably $40, $50 billion venture capital for this thing. We ended up with a whole warehouse full of stuff that nobody bought. Everybody loved it, everybody thought we were wonderful, and nobody bought the product. And so when I had all these VCs in the company at that point, and so I said, oops, guys, we seem to have a problem. And so we, at that point, had a bunch of really good VCs. This is the little lesson here is pick your investors carefully. So we had some Warburg was a great investor. We had, Rowe was in it, Rowe Capital, great investors. We had
what makes a great investor?
People who are integrity. I would say, I'm on record as saying this, investors and entrepreneurs. Integrity is the #1 critical piece. Absolutely vital. If you don't have integrity, if you have integrity, you can weather any kind of storm. If you're a scuzzball, bad stuff happens, and ultimately it's going to happen to you, even if you take advantage of somebody else along the way. So in this particular case, I had a whole bunch of really good stand-up VCs, and I had one VC who was a real scuzzball. I'm not going into names, but bad people.
Why?
Well, let's put it this way. When we were in really dire shape, we needed cash to make payroll, I said that, hey, I'm prepared to put the money into the company just as a loan, no interest loan, myself to cover payroll. But because that might actually prevent us from going into bankruptcy, the VC rep on the board got off the board conference call so we wouldn't have a quorum to vote to accept my free money into the company because they didn't want to let the company go. So that's pretty bad as this bad stuff goes. So anyway, this thing got to the point where I had another idea. That's what entrepreneurs have, right? So we had this whole network operations center and so on. So I would go to my investors and say, okay, tell you what, if you take our whole network operations center and all the stuff we know about wireless, and how about we change it around and create a whole hub for the whole wireless industry? What do you think? And there were sort of three reactions. One group said, straight up Gust. We like you, it's a very interesting idea, but you know what, I think this hand is played out, so we'll, do whatever you have to do, we'll take our hit, if you want to recapitalize it, that's fine, but, thanks, but no thanks for us. That's perfectly clear. Okay. And I had one major investor who said, we got a lot of money in this thing, and we think you might be onto something here, and we're going to have faith back so, okay, taking a very deep breath, we'll put some cash in to refund the restart over here if you come in, with us to do this. So I said, okay, that sounds really cool. Then I had this one other fund, and this other fund said, we want to be paid out in full. I said, why do you pay out in full? We just took a 95% cram down on this thing. And they said, no. He said, no. And they were the smallest investor in the operation. And so I said, well, look at the cap table, look at the capital table of the company. The last cash that went in as a secured note from me personally and this other major VC. And so if you force the company into bankruptcy, you're going to get wiped out and you're going to give me the company. Is that really does that make any sense to you? No. So trying to play the player. We know you too much reputation, you won't declare bankruptcy, you won't file. I said, if you're forcing me to do this, is that what you're going to do? So they played chicken, And you know, if somebody plays chicken with you and tries to do bad things, you know, life is too short to screw around. So I said, if that's what you want to do, if you want to force us into Chapter 11, you do it. So they did, and we went into Chapter 11, and that was probably, up until that point, the saddest day of my life. I mean, I literally cried myself to sleep. You know, filing for bankruptcy is not fun. Not fun at all. So what happened there was, surprise, surprise, they got wiped. And the company ended up being the new company funded by Citigroup, ended up being me and Citigroup owning the whole company, and we put the other straight VCs who had, you know, minor positions in the company and their original capital. And so, you know, the first guys, you know, the other guys got wiped. So what happened? Well, if you do the timing on all this, it turns out that this happened in about 1998. And that was not a bad time to be in the internet business. And so it happens that we actually started filing patents on all the stuff for the Area Broadcast Network when we first thought of it, like 4 years before. And within about 3 months of the time we came out of Chapter 11, the patents issued. Oh, wow! And the patents issued a really cool thing for wireless stuff in the whole boom world. And next thing you know, we had an appraisal on our IP portfolio of $120 million. Okay, within 4 months of coming out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, we did around a $60 million venture round, $120 million pre-valuation. Folks, those were the times. That ain't happening anytime soon. That was a blip in history, but it was a lot of fun to be in the middle of that blip in history. So there we were. But anyway, so in the old days, I was 122 people for the company. We ended up after the Chapter 11 getting crashed down to my core team of like 15 people. Then with the new funding, everything, we came back up again. We were 75. We were running the hub. Wireless hub for the whole world of wireless. I acquired a company in the UK, which got me into the bed with Richard Branson. We ended up having operations in Germany and in France and in the US and in England. And we were taking over the world. And at that point, we were heading to Europe. We had some coming from Korea. We licensed our stuff to Korea. We were heading into Europe. And it was really perfect. And so what do I know about running a mega international tech and whatever it was? So I went out to try and find a CEO for this operation. And I recruited the number 3 guy out of IBM, who was this brilliant, 17-year lifer at IBM, who run their Unix division and their mobile computing division. So he basically leaves his whole career at IBM, comes in and takes on the CEO. We do a 3-month transition, and finally, for the first time in 13 years, I get to take a vacation.
Where did you go?
I went back home to see my kids. But the next thing you know, of course, if you are following the timeline over here, is the other big shark coming in the other direction that ate the internet shark over here. And so that was the bad times, as we call them, in the year 2000. And the whole world blows up effectively overnight. And the internet world crashes, the mobile world crashes, domestically and internationally. Everything that we were in the middle of doing with our wonderful new business plan wasn't based on any one particular entity, but this one wasn't based on particular hardware, it wasn't based on a particular content. It wasn't based on, I did everything perfectly right, except that it was the wrong time. So at that point, we actually had, so we had closer operations in the US, we had some traction in Europe, we had an offer from a public company in Germany to acquire the assets. I came in for my sabbatical to sign papers on September 11th, 2001. World Trade Center goes down, the capital markets closed, and that is the end of that particular company. So this time, with no chance of anything happening in the world, this was actually a Chapter 7. And for those of you who don't know the intricacies of the chapter numbering over here, Chapter 11 is when you can actually restart and your creditors work with you when you actually reform your company. Chapter 7 is you basically pack it up and go home. So this was Chapter 7 this time. Believe me, the second bankruptcy hurts a whole lot, but not quite as bad as the first bankruptcy over there. So at that point, I go home and my wife says, okay, you're grounded.
I want to ask you a question about all this. So how much of the experience during this experience, how much did you learn on the way? Because I think part of being an entrepreneur is there's so much to learn, and how many people would agree with that? In terms of, do you feel like you're learning something new every day? I do. And how much did you?
I mean, entrepreneurship is like a shark in the water, swim forward or die. I mean, you have to get the water flowing over your gills. You have to get new things. That comes back to managing your life, your career, and it's a constant period of learning. That's one of the great things about General Assembly here is all these courses that you can take in every area. And so a lot of it is, back when there wasn't a General Assembly, there weren't these courses. So a lot of it was learn by doing and learn by mistakes. And you know, if you're not making mistakes, there's a real problem. You certainly shouldn't be an entrepreneur, and you're probably, you know, living life the wrong way. Because the only way you effectively really learn is by mistakes. Just never make the same mistake twice, which of course you've heard, which makes a lot of sense, right? But so every mistake you learn from, and I certainly did several times over. But after the second, you know, during the bad period, as we say, and I was grounded, so I was no longer allowed to start a company as an entrepreneur. So I helped get my kids to college, and I just started twiddling my thumbs, and so back then, you know, back in the boom days, there was a site that started in New York, and it was a new thing called social networking, whatever that thing was. And it was a site called 6 Degrees. How many here remember a site called 6 Degrees? Anybody? A few, right? So this was the very first social networking site. And I thought this was the coolest thing I had ever seen, because you would sign up and then you would put in like your barber or your brother or whatever it is, and they would connect people, and you could actually walk through the chain and connect up all these people. Now, the only person I know who did that is my mother, who remembers everybody she's ever met in her entire life. She walked in here today and connected all of you with each other. But I thought this was, after her, the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And it was headquartered in New York. So one day, during the boom, I just walked into their offices on 55 Broad Street and said, I want to meet the CEO of this really cool company. And there I meet this kid who's like this, you know, this young whippersnapper, a guy named Andrew Weinrich, who had actually invented social networking. And patented social networking, by the way. So anyway, Andrew and I became friends. Andrew had better luck than I did. He sold for $135 million, 6 Degrees. Unfortunately, he sold it in, I think, 2000. 3 months after he sold the company to the public company, they shut the site down. And 3 months after that, the public company disappeared. So, you know, Andrew having now, made a fortune, quickly lost a fortune. He's back on the street. But he's been an entrepreneur too. So I was sidelined. He came to me and he said, I got this idea for a wireless kind of thing. You're a wireless guy. So I said, well, I can't start a company. I can't go down. My wife won't let me. So he said, well, how about can you be an investor? So I said, okay, fine. So that's how I became my first angel deal. I invested in his company. I became vice chairman. I wrote the business plan. I got one Nicholas Negroponte. We helped him get finance. This was called Joltage, which was the first distributed Wi-Fi hotspot network. Really very cool, whole other business plan. But in any event, so that was my first angel investment. So that's how I became an angel investor. And then, of course, being a joiner, I tended to join whatever. And back in the good days, I had actually been one of the co-founders of the New York Media Association, NIMA, which was sort of the predecessor of New York Tech Media way back then. And along the way, in the late 90s, NIMA had created something called the Angel Investor Program, where people who had made it in the first round, folks like Scott Kernan, Nestor Dyson, and Alan Patricoff, would come in and hear pitches from people. And so now that I was officially an angel investor, I invested in this thing, I joined this NIMA's angel program. And then the next thing you know, they were doing, the NIMA itself was doing super cyber stuff, these big parties and stuff in the go-go days. All of a sudden the bad days come and you now have 8,000 members of NIMA, all unemployed, looking for jobs from the other 8,000 people, and that did not make for a very good business model for a trade association. So NIMA went bankrupt. And the only thing that was actually functioning there was the Angel Program, and it was acquired by SIA, the Software Information Association, that does the Cody Awards. And so, but SIA, it didn't make sense for them to have an angel group for this DC-based trade association. So I said, okay, how about we spin it out? So we spun out the original people who were actually writing checks for this group and created New York Angels. And this is now like 2004. And so, since I had nothing else to do, I actually spent all my time creating an angel group, and we wrote the bylaws and figured out best practices, and we were the first members of the Angel Capital Association, and we got people, tumbling around and, to join this thing, and we tripled the dues and put in requirements for investing, and developed a really functional angel group.
Let me ask you a question about that, because a lot of people in this room are talking to angels, and in fact I was having a conversation with someone last night about investors that are potentially investing in her company, and they've never angel invested before. So to founders, what kind of advice would you give them about vetting angels, working with angels, and working with investors who have never gotten into any of this before? The
first piece of advice is a little reality testing. This is one of the things that comes with age, that comes with experience. A lot of life is just pattern matching, right? And that is, you see all these things about you pick your investment very carefully. And first, you got to have investors to pick from. The odds of getting an investor, any kind of investor, good, bad, ugly, indifferent, whatever, is like teeny. The number of companies that get invested in by venture capitalists, 1 in 400. That means there are 399 companies who have tried to get venture finance for every one who gets it. Now, we live in this bizarre blogosphere, echo chamber world. You hang out here at General Assembly and you read TechCrunch and whatever, and it seems that everybody on every street corner is, oh, you know, Dennis Crowley, I'm getting, so-and-so raised $40 million for color, and so on and so forth, right? You know, those are by far outliers. Real people in the real world don't really get venture capital. I mean, it's 1 in 400. Now, angels are a little more promiscuous, and there are a lot more of them, and they invest a lot lower number, but still, for angel investing, it's 1 in 40. Right? So still, 39 to 1 against your odds of getting angel funding. So the very first thing to realize is have a little reality test in here. It's not going up a lot. A, if you don't get it, it's not because you're an idiot and awful and bad, everybody else except for you is getting it. They're not either. You're living in a very interesting, internecine little echo chamber here, right? So A is very tough. So before you say, I'm going to be so picky, get somebody to pick from first. Okay, that being said, if you are lucky enough to have people who are willing to invest in you, then, and by the way, if you have a company, and the only way you will have a company going forward is if you take outside investment, you have to make a choice. Do I take the investment or do I not have a company? So if Beelzebub walks up, or investment fund comes in, you may be saying, hey, life is too short and I'll shut the company down rather than take this tainted money, right? On the other hand, if it's like dumb money, or it's money that you get a hard time, and that's why one of my uncles said, a great deal, buys a lot of aspirin. So it can be an obnoxious person, but if he's actually legit, you might want to look at that if you're up a choice to shut the company down. But let's say that you actually have a choice of multiple investors, angels, VCs, whatever to choose from. You go with integrity, and you go with reputation, and you go with smarts every day of the week. And I've now at this point had a dozen or more VCs in me, and I know every angel in New York, and most of them in major in the country. And I will tell you, the quality tells, and the quality and the good things that a smart, high integrity, smart money brings is inestimably worth more than pure cash.
What are the key questions that a founder could ask an angel in order to better qualify that?
May I speak to some of your portfolio companies? Very simple. Reference check. They're reference checking you. They're looking at your business plan. So assuming you have a choice, right? But even if you don't, you have any other bad guy that's actually asking, right? So any angel who will not tell you in which companies they've invested, will not put you in touch with their portfolio CEOs, run, do not walk. And so this is a very interesting transparency thing over there. I am constantly flabbergasted by investors who play really close to us. Oh, I can't tell you who my, what kind of limited partners I have, or I can't, they won't tell you all their LPs, but they should be able to give you a feel for it. Companies which they've invested, they should be able to put you in touch with their CEOs and say, call any of you want and ask what they think. And then you call them and you ask. And CEO to CEO, they'll often be pretty cool about giving you a straight answer over there. I've done it for good investors and not so good investors. And some of my good friends in the space are people who I've warned off with really bad guys, right? Because that can hurt you in the moment. So do your reference checking on them, and then try and make sure that what they're doing matches what you're doing. So if you have somebody who only invests in biotech and you're a social network, you really got to wonder, can they add a lot of value to me? Are they going to be helpful when things go wrong? We had one investor with Angels who was coming out of the corporate world and was a really big shot success in the corporate world and had run corporate M&A portfolios and stuff. And all of a sudden, Gust gets into the startup world and invested big money into the deal. And we're sitting here, and the mindset is completely different. Understanding the pivots and understanding the challenges of a startup is really different. So smart money with experience, a good track record, high integrity, all critical.
I want to ask you one more question, because I definitely want to get to Gust, and then I want to open the questions to the room, because we're already running on an hour. So tell us a little bit about Gust and why, and I think this is actually the way people can pitch their companies to you, is by creating a profile.
So here I am, picking up our story with Les, our hero.
Yeah.
Running New York Angels, and been in this a couple of years. And, Josh Koppelman and Howard Morgan, by the way, the founders of First Round Capital, were both New York Angels board members as individual angels. And one day Josh pulls me aside and says, excuse me, I don't understand that. You're a little overqualified to be running an angel group, but I said I'm not allowed to do anything else. But eventually, after having a couple of years of me around the house, my wife said, all right, go start a company. And at that point, understanding where this world was going, being very familiar now with the angel world, having invested, I've now invested in over 80 companies. And having seen thousands of companies come through and having been on both sides of the issue, it was very, very clear that technology changes were meaning you could start companies with a whole lot less than the traditional VCs. So my first, Air Media #1, took $20 million in VC to get to internet product ship. After the restart, Air Media 2 only took $2 million to get to internet product ship. When I invested in Andrew and Jolich, only took $200,000 to get to internet product ship. New York Angels a couple of years ago invested in a company called Pond 5, which is now the largest stock media footage marketplace online. They came to us with a full management team, full product, generating revenue, total dollars invested till we wrote our check, $20,000. $20 million, $2 million, $200,000, $20,000. Straight line, you're looking here at an extraordinarily, exponential change in the cost. And so looking at that, it was clear that with lowering costs of starting a company, it makes it available to more and more people to fund it. You don't need to go to Warburg Pincus anymore and raise $20 million. You can actually go to individual people who put in $20,000 or $50,000. It's a good deal. And therefore, with this stuff happening, communications, globalization, online platforms, SaaS, all these things, and running New York Angels, it was clear to me that there was a potentially big future here. And there was a big prize to be had if somebody would be able to have the sitzfleisch, as we say, the ability just to sit and wait and patiently play out a hand for a long period of time to create an infrastructure for this whole platform, for this whole world new world of angel investing and startup, lean startups and so on. And so that's what the idea was behind Gust. Now it turns out, not an original idea, there have been by my count about 150 different sites that